Joining us now is Mr. Murphy, former senior analyst with the DIA. He also served at the White House at the National Security Council as their director for West Africa. Mr. Murphy, thank you very much for being here tonight. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
So I read your piece with great interest. It also resonated with me in a deep and scary way, because I feel like what you are saying about why you resigned and what you are recognizing, what's going on in our country right now, is very dark and is very serious and feels like a real warning. And I just wanted to ask if I'm taking you too seriously here, or if you actually mean this as gravely as it seems.
No, Rachel, I think you're right. I think this is that serious. And I think we need to be thinking about what's happening in our country the way that we often look at what happens in other countries. So in my personal case, as you said, I resigned because I lost confidence in the most senior Department of Defense leaders after they treated me and others who were demonstrating peacefully for racial justice like enemies. Seeing they were unwilling to stand up to the president, I felt I needed to leave government, share what I was seeing and how similar it looked to other authoritarian states, and ultimately do everything that I could to prevent the situation from getting worse.
That's a remarkable story about you as a person and how personally you got to that place. I also feel like, though, you're sort of inviting us to tap your expertise as to what the solution is here. When you talk about losing confidence in the military and in the civilian leadership of the Pentagon, potentially in the Justice Department, Homeland Security leadership as well, in terms of whether or not they are standing up for democratic principles, they're standing up for what's right rather than just becoming a tool of the president. I feel like you're the kind of person I would ask about how we as citizens and we as a country correct for that. I think we all hoped that there would be senior leadership in those entities in our country that would just do the right thing, and that would form a barrier where the president couldn't cross and couldn't do things that aren't supposed to happen in our country. If they're not a barrier, if they're not doing the right thing, how do we correct for that?
Sure. So as I mentioned in the piece that I wrote for Just Security, what I've seen in my work and working and looking at other countries is that the basics of participatory democracy are what's most effective in countering situations like this. So this is massive voter turnout, citizen support directly for campaigns, and peaceful demonstrations that are part of enduring social movements that shape electoral politics. There are several key things that all of us can do now and can help others to do, and that's register to vote, protect our voting process, organize our communities to support the leaders who value democratic institutions, and get every eligible voter to cast their ballot and make sure that it's counted. These are the things that when I look at other contexts and the places that I have worked on at the White House and before, this is what was effective in either convincing leaders who otherwise were going to or headed toward disrespecting the wishes of their people to change course, or who had actively tried to subvert the will of their own people. These were the sorts of things that were effective in changing their minds or forcing their hands.
You mentioned about protecting our voting process. I've done a lot of coverage of voting rights issues over the years. We've never before had a national election in this kind of an environment with the kind of threats that you're describing, where we all also, or a lot of us, are also supposed to be getting our ballots and submitting our ballots through the Postal Service, and where the president is now openly saying that he wants to deny resources to the Postal Service, and we're watching his handpicked leader of the Postal Service restructure it in ways that seem designed to make sure that that breaks. I've just in my inbox tonight, since I've been on the air, I'm watching my own staff discussing these letters that we're now getting from multiple states, including Pennsylvania and Michigan and Maryland, where postal services are warning that under their plans for mail-in voting, with the changes that the president has instituted there, it's not going to work. That, I think, is causing despair in a lot of people because it doesn't feel like there are very many workarounds. Are there examples from the international context, or examples that you know of, or principles to apply to talk practically that should guide us practically in terms of how we shore things like that up, how we come to the defense of institutions that we need in order to keep our democracy working?
So I think there are a few things. I think we rely on political leaders, and at the present, we're talking about lack of confidence in political leaders, and our top political leader and the president signaling things that would undermine the key roles of institutions. So I think as citizens, as voters, as contestants in elections, and as local communities, we need to stand up for these institutions We need to bolster the role of our apolitical civil servants, of which I used to be one, and for which I have great respect for those people who remain in government doing this critical work. And we need to ensure that they know that we are counting on them to uphold the values of our institutions. And we also need to be vigilant as we see things like what's happening right now that worry us. And so for me as an intelligence analyst, if I look at our country as though I was looking at another country, while the indicators of authoritarianism have been present since very early on, we're talking disputing facts, delegitimizing opponents, demonizing the media, disrespecting institutions, just to name a few, that was there early. But what we're seeing now, and since the spring, truly is flashing red warning lights. Autocrats aren't the most creative men around. They're all drawing from a similar shallow well of self-interest, which means they often rely on the same tools, which can be quite predictable. But now the use of federal forces to disrupt protests, to spy on Americans, to actively trying to undermine the upcoming election, like you mentioned, by either floating the idea of delaying it or starving the Postal Service of the resources that it needs. These are the kinds of things that we would expect to see in authoritarian contexts abroad. And this is exactly when civil society needs to stand behind the institutions and the elements of government, and also to peacefully express their will and to reject any idea that the results of our election and the sanctity of the election process could be challenged by the president.
It's helpful. I mean, seeing parallels abroad is scary, I think, for us as Americans, but it does also direct us to look for parallels and look for help abroad for anti-authoritarian movements, enduring social movements and tactics that, like you described, that have been successful in seeing these guys out. Kyle Murphy, former senior analyst with the Defense Intelligence Agency. I know a lot of people have left the government in one way or another because they felt like they couldn't stomach this. Very few of them have articulated their reasons in a way that's really helpful to the rest of us to understand. Thank you for doing so, and thanks for talking to us about it tonight.
Thank you for having me.